So Albo's bought a house, and check out the headlines. It is quite the media frenzy. How's Albo gone after purchasing a new waterfront property? How's Albo gone? Says Sky News, Rupert Murdoch's Sky News Israelia. Cuddly Albo, now a torn and tattered teddy bear, says the Daily Telegraph, another Murdoch property. Yahoo, out of touch, Albo slammed. Susan Lee, deputy opposition leader, is the slammer. Susan, who actually had a bona fide investment property scandal, is now up in arms about Albo's property purchase. Albo buying a house for himself and Jodie. It's quite the media storm. So, we encountered a bit of a Twitter storm yesterday when posting one innocuous tweet reply about Albo buying a house. That's now had, there it is, 7 words, slightly tone deaf. Does Albo have advisors? Now, that little tweet reply has now had almost 100 replies, mostly angry replies about the pile-on against Albo buying a house. We've got no problem with Albo buying a house like most people, of course, but this is a media story. Quite a nice house too, as we can see. Now, basically, there's a lot of talk on Twitter about social media about the politics of envy and so on, and this pile-on from Albo's enemies, both on the left and the right. Our tweet response was in response to a tweet by David McBride's lawyer, Eddie Lloyd, who tweeted the $4.5 million Copacabana beach shack purchase on the northern cliffs above the beach on the central coast above Sydney. Eddie Lloyd has incidentally won leave to appeal the McBride conviction in the High Court, which is great news. And David McBride himself, the Afghan war crimes whistleblower, lives in a house. He's got a new house too. It's the big house. He's in jail for 5 years for being a whistleblower. We'll get onto that coverage when that happens. But in the meantime, the frenzy over Albo's house. Yes, it is politics of envy, and we can understand that. You know, as a surfer, just looking at this beautiful spot above Copacabana's left-hand point break and gazing down the beach to the other end of the beach, which is McMaster's Beach, where the point sometimes works too, plenty of lovely beaches in between. It's a beautiful spot. So we're green with envy about Albo's purchase, but we don't, of course, begrudge his purchase, as many people won't. The fact is, this was an inevitable media pile-on, and it will go for some time, probably until the election, with all the Dutton fear-mongering from the other side of the House. Now, as I said, nobody begrudges Albo buying a house, or very few people. He's PM, for goodness sake. Of course he gets paid well. He deserves a house. Neither can we begrudge people commenting on it either, though. This was always going to be a news story, whether a distraction or not. And in terms of real policies, it's a huge distraction. This is precisely what the media loves to feed on. Once they saw the social media reaction online, it was on for young and old. A flash house, a PM under fire from left and right. A media duopoly, which is pro-coalition. News Corp basically is the PR arm of the coalition and makes no apologies for being complete cheerleaders. And the Nine Entertainment Network, that's the old Fairfax Papers and so on, and 2GB, well, that's run by former Liberal Party staffers now. There's the shock jocks. It's always going to be a media story. And no, it's not fair. But Albo is a public figure, and it was always going to happen. Now, personally, we admire Albo, always have. We're roughly, I think we're the same age, went to the same uni, probably attended the same Radio Birdman and Sunny Boys concerts back in the day. So we have quite a bit of sympathy for this decision where the optics have gone awry. And we've hammered him over policy over the years, over the secrecy, Gaza, timid a timid reform program and so on. And this is a complete distraction. But this is the reality of the media, and we call it secondary media. It's when some story takes off and everybody else piles in. But yes, I mean, Albo, if anybody, deserves a nice house after all he has achieved in his career. He's gone from a youngster in a housing estate with a single mother to Prime Minister of the country. He's gone from being a DJ in his 20s in Newtown to a party apparatchik, and then risen through the ranks of the New South Wales Labor right as the only significant Labor left figure to get to the very top and become Prime Minister of Australia. Personally, we have some admiration for Albo, but the public interest observation to be made from all this is really just that, and this is simply mathematics, that somebody these days in politics, in opposition and various times in government, working in public service all their lives, they would not be able to afford a clifftop house on Copacabana as well as 2 or 3 other houses. If we pause for a moment and have a look at for instance, people were saying yesterday, Peter Dutton, why don't people concentrate on Peter Dutton? Well, they do, but Peter Dutton didn't buy a house yesterday, which is one thing, so he won't be in the news. The media is skewed. They're pro-Dutton as well, the mainstream media. We have a look at Albo's Register of Interests, which is the disclosures, the pecuniary interest register, where you have to disclose your assets. There he's got 3 properties here. And, of course, this one, I think he might have sold one of those, and this latest purchase has not been registered. So we're looking at 3 or 4 properties. Unlike Peter Dutton, if we have a look at Dutton's disclosures, he's got a lot more sort of super fund disclosures and so on. He's also got family trusts. And this is a lurk because, of course, trusts, you don't have to disclose what you've got in the trust. He could have 20 properties in there. Who would know? It's a massive loophole. Because, of course, you could appoint your lawyer's company as the trustee of the trust, and you could have your niece as the beneficiary of the trust, and you would not have to disclose what's in the trust, even that you have a trust. I think they just disclose that they have a trust for optics, because otherwise people would not believe their disclosures, because everybody with any significant amount of money has a trust. Now, trusts are a scam, but we won't get onto that today. Suffice to say that this could not happen mathematically. Somebody in public service having these kind of properties, that's what's happened in Australia, and that's why this is a story. But has the media covered appropriately? Has the media covered all the successive government policies? The Libs have been in power most of the time, 2/3 of the time, while all this has happened, right? Most recently, the 9 years of doing nothing. But what about capital gains tax relief? Do we see that in all the property porn coverage in the Fairfax papers? What about negative gearing? I mean, even today, one of the media pylon stories was about Albo's potential subsidies if he were to negatively gear this $4.5 million property. This completely speculative stuff. What about foreign capital deluge, money coming from China and so we're pushing up the price of property in Australia? What about the successive governments? Since 2006, they've failed to implement their promised AML-CTF legislation, Tranche 2, to capture lawyers, property developers and accountants laundering money. They're still not covered by the money laundering laws. So it's successive government failures which have led to the spiral in property prices. The whole focus has been on property as an investment rather than as a basic necessity. This is a fundamental flaw which has now led to this housing crisis, which will take some years to fix, if it can be fixed. Because, of course, the other problem is the system. The system, which has been agreed to slowly over 2 decades, of politicians and policymakers being bombarded by lobbyists and rent seekers. Generations now. Political donations. It's the system which has made Australia a less equal society, and that has exacerbated this uproar, this distraction. over Albo buying a home. It now makes it impossible, though, for a young person in Australia to, without family means, to work in the public service and end up with these kind of assets. Simple as that. And then to continue this analogy, this sad analogy, this intergenerational unfairness, the way that DIY super has developed with all the tax breaks to people with the most superannuation and the self-managed super funds, is the various tax breaks and perks the wealthier Australians are privy to, which younger people who'll be working to pay the taxes for the system, that they don't enjoy, the younger Australians, this intergenerational inequity. Because now we're in a situation, and this has not been covered properly in the media, where wealthier Australians with their DIY super are able to fund not only their own retirements, but also build up a gigantic tax shelter to pass on their wealth to future generations, further entrenching this inequity. This is the biggie that's been ignored in the media, this entrenched intergenerational wealth inequality. Now, of course, it's the media's duty not just to salivate over people's beach shack property purchases, but it's their duty to cover these kind of things. And it's the duty of politicians to act in the public interest, to enact legislation, to make Australia a fair place to live. So from that point of view, they've failed, the media and the political classes. So politics, of course, is about feelings, and I personally feel a certain amount of sympathy for Albo in this situation and admiration for what he's achieved, although the policies have been timid since he's come in. But the fact is that in terms of policy, there is a failure. Now, he's inherited a bit of a basket case. He's come into office when inflation was above 7% during an oil shock after 9 years of coalition, incompetence and inactivity on the policy front. But like all politicians these days, he's shackled to by the power of vested interests. And that's made it hard for him to reform. This is a systemic issue, and this is why the minor parties and independents are growing in numbers over the past 10 years. This is more than just a two-term trend by the looks of it, because of this inability, this policy stasis, this inability to be able to stand up to vested interests. And so there you have it, the kerfuffle, the inevitable media storm over Albo buying a house, which of course he deserves. And why shouldn't he have a house? And he's done a few things too. He's done Medicare and DV violence leave. He's done good childcare stuff. He's done bits and pieces, but the system is flawed. Please like, share or comment in the section below, because this is going to go on, this one, for a while. The hypocrisy in the mainstream media is glaring, but inevitable.